I'm going to share first this Figma, which everyone can jump into, as always. The format for today is a little bit more open, we're hoping. So we didn't have a single speaker, we're going to have three different speakers. So we'll kick off with John, if that's okay, talking about Gridcoin, and he'll give us a little bit. The format is a little bit. We'll start off by having John give like a 2, 3, 4 minute talk about like the problem or the challenge or the thing that he's working on in Gridcoin, and then we'll have some time for us to have some specific clarifying questions. What are you doing? What do I need to know? And then after that, actually, we have. Oh, I'm gonna share my screen. Oop, where am I? There we are. Desktop. There we are. So here we'll have John will do his presentation and then he'll take notes as we all give feedback and talk about the project that he's working on and see how we can build in. And then we'll flip over to Philip. Philip will talk a little bit about the DeSci ideas that we're having right now around coins. And then Chris has something he wants to share at the end as well. So, and that's Chris from DeSci, not Christian Nosler, just to make sure. and I think one thing that we'll do right before we go in is we want to make sure that we get feedback from everyone. So right up in this top bit, we've got this intro. And one thing that I just want to do is have everybody anchor on like why they're here. So take just like maybe 30 seconds to just write down, hey, what is one core idea or like thought that I'm thinking around incentives that can be brought in? And this can sometimes help initiate more extensive discussion. So it'll take about 30 seconds and then we can jump in.
How do you do that? How do you?
Yeah, so if you're in the Figma, there's this little sticky note down here. So you can just click on it, click, and then type whatever you want.
Yep.
Mm.
Ooh, this is some cool topics coming up here. Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah,
I have a sense that this is only the first of several conversations that we're going to have about this.
Yeah, for real. Okay, seems pretty good. So now let's just kick off. John, you want to share, talk, whatever? I'll take a little bit of notes on what you're saying, and then we can kick off.
You need to share, so it's going to kick you off really quick.
Sweet.
Slides together for y'all. Don't put slides together. Okay. So Gridcoin is a coin from 2013. It approaches incentives and token and crypto design from a different perspective than a lot of things that I've seen. So we all know this triangle, I'm pretty sure. A lot of the incentives that we see deal up here with making something rewarding. So incentivizing peer review, incentivizing X, Y, Z. So Gridcoin takes a different approach and says this triangle is great. It is not complete though, and it's a little inaccurate on the bottom. So we think there is a context that is incredibly important at the bottom of this triangle. And that is what makes something possible. The infrastructure is what makes something technically feasible. You can't make something technically feasible unless you understand the context on which everything is built around it. And when you look at this triangle, you can abstract it to more than just the scientific system. This triangle works well with everything. So if we simplify this triangle up into science, and we can then duplicate it and think about what else this space since 2008, really since 1980, has been working to change. So it's also worked on the finance system. It's also worked in the gaming industry. And these are three very big sectors where that triangle applies. and you can start to see the fractal forming. The thing that holds each subsection together of this fractal is trust. This technology created a system of trust. So if you take then this this larger triangle made up of smaller triangles, you can make it even bigger. You can say it applies the open science triangle applies to any sector that this technology that changes the way coordination layers work is going to change. So when you end up, this fractal ultimately produces a society. So the whole image made up of small sectors of a society that rely on trust are a society. And Gridcoin says society, it's not really Gridcoin that says it, it's a lot of economists that say society is a currency. It's one of the first things that comes up in a society is a way to exchange goods and services that aren't direct barter. One of the first things the US had to do, for example, was figure out how to do a currency. It took many iterations to actually get it correct, and it's still changing. So in the context of incentivizing science in the right way with this new technology, we have to think about what the current system looks like. I'll go through this really quickly, but it doesn't work because the way it works. Treasury Department creates treasury bonds. Treasury bonds are sold to banks. Banks get a little money based on those treasury bonds, give out some of that money to consumers at a higher interest rate. Consumers produce things and pay taxes back to the Treasury Department. Banks fail because they gamble. And then the Federal Reserve has to come in and essentially bail them out. They buy the Treasury bonds, give the banks the money, and then let the Treasury bonds run off the balance sheet back to the Treasury Department. And all of this is based on debt. So this is obviously slides from a different presentation. But that's the idea of the scientific system right now. And that's why it doesn't work. That's the context. It's built in a system where debt is the core value that everything must operate within. That's the big triangle, is debt. So we can't change the scientific system without breaking out of a debt system, because everything we do within the debt system is always going to be beholden to that large triangle, which is debt. So there's also where does the value of the currency come from? It comes from the demand of the Treasury Department to say, hey, if we give you a loan in US dollar, you must pay us back in US dollar. So it's foreign debt that largely pays it back. This does not make sense. Happy Chewbacca. So what Bitcoin did, what this coordination layer does, is it changes the public from the consumer to the public and says that they have a thing, they produce stuff, they produce computational energy. They take electricity and turn it into computation cycles, and in exchange for that thing, they get Bitcoin. And that process essentially secures a public good, which is that ledger of who has how much of the currency they gave, essentially who gave how much computation power to society. And the value comes again from demanding the currency to interact with that ledger. So what Gridcoin did is it says, let's secure the ledger with proof of stake. That's not super important. And let's take the Treasury Department and turn it into a approved researcher. And let's give the thing that the public has, this thing of value, an electrical, a computer cycle, electricity in the form of computation, to that approved researcher who's approved by the public. And then let's send the scoreboard of who contributes how much computation power to the ledger, which will then print a currency and give it to people based on their relative contributions to it. So the approved researcher creates treasury bonds, not treasury bonds, they create impactful outcomes, like they model the spike protein in a set of banks that goes to an approved translator, who then creates a vaccine, which the public then buys. So they're buying the outcome of the system with the money they earned by starting the system in the first place. But you can always trace that value, that root value, back to a hard commodity, something that is truly a valuable electrical energy versus someone putting ones and zeros in a computer. It's not debt. And there's a lot more to this system that I'm just going to skip over. But that's the very, very quick way of how we looked at Gridcoin. We're not creating a tokenomic model. We're creating a crypto economic model where instead of printing currency because someone says, go print some currency, I'm creating treasury bonds. We're printing currency because someone provided computational power to an approved researcher. And that is a thing of value. And if science exists within this system, if that triangle was to exist in this system, then we could do a lot of interesting stuff with the infrastructure and the incentives and every part of that triangle. Because in the human, in order to interact with this system, the green human, in order to make more money, would have to do more science. And instead of take loans out essentially and buy stocks, that's like stock buybacks. That's essentially all they do right now. So that's the thinking behind Gridcoin. If we can change that big triangle, the larger context behind everything else we're trying to do, then we can make a very significant impact on how science is incentivized and how researchers are incentivized and how the public is incentivized to engage with this. There's a lot of secondary outcomes to the Gridcoin system, like scientific engagement. We're building now the third iteration of our incentive algorithm that will probably come out next year or the year after that. That will include a lot more than what's in this very jumbled chart. Granted, this jumbled chart already includes a lot. So that's me trying to crash through this as quickly as possible in a couple of minutes. Would love to have it get torn down.
Nice. Renan, you mentioned in chat, how is impact measured? And I think that's probably a good place to start.
Okay,
Do you want to build on that?
I think that's a
Okay.
real deep rabbit hole.
Not really.
Potentially.
It's a very simple thing. So it's electrical energy computation cycles are a very simple thing to measure. Flops, essentially. So the economic system, once we get into the economic system of Gridcoin, that is a deep rabbit hole. But essentially, the economic system at large includes between 20 and 30 different projects, computational projects, approved researchers. And each approved researcher rewards credits based on essentially the flops provided to their project. There's a gross oversimplification of it. But what then Gridcoin does is it takes all these different measures of impact from all these different projects, equalizes them, smooths them out, and then with its economic system, distributes currency based on relative contributions to one another. And one of the things the economics does is it incentivizes people naturally to find a project that doesn't have enough compute to get its work done, because essentially the less people working on a project, the more GRC you get from a protocol. And again, that GRC is minted day by day, well, block by block, really. It's not held in a purse by an individual organization. It's minted similar to how the US dollar is. We've successfully expanded that, by the way, to folding at home, and we are looking at IPFS on how we can incentivize that. And all of these, the what is impactful science part of what projects do we incentivize is chosen by the network. So the public has a conversation within itself, because the network is just made up of scientists and the public. And we have to talk about what's valuable science and what's not. So what we incentivize changes over time based on the conversations we have. It incentivizes researchers to talk about the research and citizens to learn about the research. Because if we incentivize someone trying to hack the NSA, our network will crash immediately as soon as people figure out that's what we're incentivizing. We need to incentivize good science because that's our value set. That's the grand context under which we operate.
So is it voting by the sort of trusted seed of researchers in the network?
No, it's voting by everyone, which includes trusted seeds of network. So we're the first DAO that existed, and we're really the only one that survived since 2013 because Ethereum's DAO started to crash. But what it is we measure contributions to the network. Currently, we're looking into ways to expand this. And contributions include number of coins you have, because that secures the ledger, not because you hold the coins. It's not like a tokenomics model where you just buy coins and have governance power over a DAO. You use these coins to stake in the network to secure the consensus layer. That trust triangle requires people to have coins and contribute them to the network. And then there's also the amount of computation cycles you contribute to the network. That it comes into the form of magnitude. So voting weight in the network is a algorithm. It's math based on number of coins you have plus number of magnitude units you have combined in a weighted metric that can fluctuate over time based on the given need of a network. If we have too many stakers, we'll probably incentivize people to crunch, sell their GRC, to buy hardware and give it to scientists, or there's other ways to convert GRC into computation cycles as well. We are looking into other ways to incentivize scientists to have a voice in the network without having to give computation cycles or have GRC as a currency. But the challenge with that is we don't need to do that, because literally anyone can enter the network for free, because everyone already has a GPU and can just get GRC and get magnitude units and then have a big voice. So people aren't sure if we actually need to add another layer to that.
John, can you maybe share some links about this coin?
Links. Yes. Give me a second. I'll pull up a link tree somewhere.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understood everything that that you presented, but it sounds like that this is something that already exists for a while.
Yes, it's one of the oldest cryptocurrencies, and it's one of the longest running cryptocurrencies. It's one of the largest crypto networks by number of nodes on the blockchain, number of nodes on the network securing the blockchain. It's one of the largest communities, and it is a project that has, I can simply say, almost never hyped itself. We don't participate in the hype cycles. We very much try to build a network worth building and not.
Gotcha. Cool.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, I feel there's almost like two types of problems to solve, right? There's the ones that have ground truth ways of assigning rewards and incentives, like how much storage do you provide? How many flops do you provide? How many like these hard commodities do you provide, right? And then there's the entire world of less objective things, which require, that are socially constructed, right? Like how impactful is this piece of research, right? According to an editor or according to like experts in the field or something, right? And it seems like the incentive systems that, let's say, programmatically reward the expenditure of resources when you're faced by an objective measure is, let's say, much easier to solve than what you're faced with much more socially constructed perceptions, right? And the other issue with socially constructed perceptions is that they're also more vulnerable to abuse, like Sybil attacks, right? Like reviewer rings, like all sorts of strategic coordination mechanism that distort, right? The ideal, essentially like the true representation of like the aggregated belief distribution that represents a true representation of that community over this piece of research, right? So like one of the big challenges, I think, is understanding what are the classes of mechanism that can allow us to create similar mechanism design within the realm of socially constructed judgments. And I think we briefly broached this last time. I think there's different fields working on this. There's in computer science, they have this theory, this field called peer prediction, right? And peer prediction is about eliciting truthful and effortful signals. And it's fairly complicated. I was diving into peer prediction lately, and I would say that they do focus on things like, can we find the Nash equilibrium, right? And like very classical economic systems, theories. And then there's other interesting efforts that I think are very, very interesting. And I would draw your attention to this idea now that is very powerful on Twitter, which is called community notes, right? Community notes is very interesting to me because it seeks to find consensus across differences so that it looks at the rating of different people and weighs these rating higher if these people tend to disagree more, right? Because this is the idea that heterogeneous agents, the more they differ, means that when they agree, it's very likely that their agreement represents a kernel of truth. It's more likely that an agreement between heterogeneous agents that differ on many other dimensions, when they agree, this is a very important signal, right? And it's really interesting to think about this class of mechanism design that community node has implemented, and how this could translate potentially into mechanisms that would allow for scientific curation, essentially.
I think that's interesting and kind of relates to some of the things that people were mentioning, bringing in up here. So I kind of want to pull in a little bit of that. I think, John, you would put in larger context of value, and then Ronan, you would put in Goodhart's law of when a measure becomes a target. Something that I noticed about this thing that like is particularly a strength of what you have here is that like the system gives compute, and then you're rewarded for compute. It's quite simple, and the context scope is small, but related to this issue of like, all right, what's the social arbitration layer, and like what's the social bit of this, and then what are the hard commodities? How do we kind of expand this scope from like, all right, I'm a citizen, I can give compute, because as soon as you start adding in, it feels like as soon as you start adding in different like ecosystems almost, then it becomes harder and harder to have well made incentives, because it just, the complexity expands really quickly.
Yeah,
So
I
I'm
mean,
wondering if either you, John, or Ronan have some thoughts on this, or anyone else can jump in as well.
I'm about to go.
Yeah, I would argue even that, you know, like having some sort of a based incentive that is decoupled from the, you know, social or cultural needs and goals might cause like distortion at the end of what are you aiming for exactly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, I mean,
So-
we could say this is intractable, right? We could say like the moment we deviate from like objective measures, like how many flops, how much storage, how much computation you're providing to the network, the moment you start deviating from these hard, objectively measurable things, you might enter intractable territory, right? And therefore this whole endeavor is foolish, right? It's possible. I think it's a fair stance to have to some degree, right? And it's actually, it's probably the fairest default stance to stay on, right? And the question is like, are there paths to say, no, there's potential out there, right? And I think
we already do this though.
You know, if we look at like,
we have credit scores. We have
Sorry?
credit scores, which are intractable. So we have credit scores. We use measures of non-objective truths all the time.
well, credit scores are pretty objective, no? I mean, if I don't pay my mortgage, it's like I'm pretty objective as signal, right?
Includes objective details with other things as well. When you go to a bank, you can take out a loan based on your credit score and based on your social relationship with the bank, your standing in the community. There's a lot of things that will apply to that algorithm. So I agree that there's a differentiation between objective and non-objective, like social scores, but there is what you were talking about before, the community nodes, is something, it's part of a web of trust. If we can build a way where the people I trust influence what I see, and then if someone I disagree with, exactly as you described, also agrees with someone I already trust in this web, and how that trust is defined can go 1,000 different ways, then I see this thing that both the person I trust and the person I don't like agree on very quickly. You just expand that. Yes, it gets very complex very quickly, but that's not to say it's necessarily difficult. It's just very complex.
Yeah, no, I think community nodes are a fantastic, absolutely groundbreaking innovation in terms of eliciting signals. I believe community nodes are like the future of democracy. That's how bullish I am on community nodes, right? This idea of like finding consensus across differences, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually it's not much of a web of trust as much as it's a web of distrust in a sense, right? It's like the more I differ from Ronan in my opinions, and when we come together and we agree on something, this is very, very highly valued by the system, right? So it's a really interesting thing. Imagine if you have a way of, let's say, you have like a metric on research, right? It's like called big if true, for instance, right? That we know, like, you're published in a glamorous journal, generally tends to mean big if true. This idea of like who comes up with a judgment around big if true, right? Right now, currently, it's an editor who has deep experience around what is the cutting edge of their field, and who's assisted by a network of people that they can rely on, right? Peer reviewers typically. And they help creating this aggregate judgment of like, yeah, big if true, right? And this would, be the criteria on top of like, great methodology and soundness of the conclusions and all of this other stuff, right? That would really push a paper up. And the question is like, now, what is the intersection between these mechanisms that you'd find in community notes? And is there a translation potential through of these mechanisms of finding consensus across difference in the realm of socially constructed truths, right? And if there is there a possibility to tag on an incentive mechanism without distorting the underlying ability of the algorithm to converge towards surfacing truth, right? And I think that's a really fascinating conversation.
It really is.
Did you want to say something a second ago?
Shahar,
yeah. No, but I just started to listen about community notes and thinking about it. By the way, I think I might have stumbled into some peer prediction mechanism like a few years ago that attempts to do something like that. I'm not sure entirely. Just like surfaced. I will look for it, and if it's good, I will share it. Now I just had a question for Jonathan about like the way that trust is built in the system. Like maybe I missed something. I just like the way I saw it, is that trust is built on the on the computation power that you're providing.
Also, John, if you can respond a little bit quickly, and then we'll try and get to Philipp's.
It's a stakeholder system, I think. I always get stakeholder and shareholder confused. So if the essential theory is if you have skin in the game, you are less likely to cheat the game. So if you have the currency that secures the blockchain, and if you have a high score in terms of number of computation cycles you've contributed, you're considered someone who is going to make decisions that are best for the network. It's not a truth guaranteed, but it's fairly good. It's similar to Bitcoin, where if you have invested a lot in all this hardware, all these GPUs, you're probably not going to try to screw with the blockchain. You're probably going to not censor it, because that would destroy your worth, all the money you put into building it. The social aspect of it is something I would love to see personally added to it, and we're in discussions now about how to add different layers to it, but it will get complicated very quickly. I can't leave this thing.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Note, if anybody has additional things that we didn't get to, because these discussions are pretty short, pretty condensed, drop in the notes in this area, and we can potentially make further further discussion in future seminars. But Philipp, here you go.
Yes. Okay. So let me try to figure out here my Zoom. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right. So this is an attempt to pull together some of the ideas that we've been toying around with over the last couple of months and years. Very, very early stage. Okay. So the idea is to have an incentive layer for DeSci and for DeSci nodes, where we would have a token that creates a reward system for scientific authors and referees, as well as for software developers that contribute to the open DeSci infrastructure. And the intrinsic financial value of the token would be driven by donations to improve science. So authors, they would earn royalties for publishing, and they would spend them for applying for attestations. Referees would earn tokens for conducting peer review. There's probably going to be a time limit and some quality criteria, whatever. Sponsors donate to an open science fund in exchange for becoming a named sponsor on research objects and receiving proof of sponsorship. And the Open Science Fund buys and distributes the tokens to the authors and the referees. The developers, they create scripts and dApps for the ecosystem, and they earn rewards when their dApp is being used. So that's the basic idea. There's probably also room in that system for stakers that I haven't really thought about much. But the one thing that I wanted to dive deeper into is this idea of how to create royalties for authors. Okay, guiding principles. First, scientists are the undervalued creator class. We should give them royalties for the work that they're doing, very similar to royalties that book authors receive, musicians receive, influencers receive. Second, a really cool guiding principle, which is actually something that Chris came up with, is this idea that an increasing token price should lead to more and better science getting published, right? So this ideally the rallying call here is like if the price of that token goes to infinity, science is fixed. Third, the tokens have not only a monetary value, but they also have an information value and they have status value. So monetary obviously means they can be exchanged into other currencies and or spent on valuable things. Information value would come from token transactions creating valuable metadata about science, such as knowledge graphs. I'm not going to go into that, but I think there's a lot of potential there. And then third, status comes from donating and earning tokens which signal valuable contributions to science. Then next, the rewards for the authors and the referees, they should depend not only on quantity, but also on quality. And this is where things are obviously going to get really tricky because the big question is obviously, how do we measure these things? And I think there is probably not going to be one bill that fits them all. I think what we need, especially at the beginning, is a system that has flexibility to experiment with different mechanisms and to actually compare them rigorously. And then finally, attestation communities such as journals and referees, they should be able to set their own prices for the services that they offer, such that services that are in higher demand can actually charge higher prices. So basically a market economy. Okay, so here is a first very, very simple idea of an algorithm for author royalties. There is a lot of different ways how you can do that. Here's a very simple one. First, for each author I, and each discrete moment in time t, we calculate an index value, xyt, that measures the quantity and quality of contributions up to that point in time. Second, at the time of royalty payment t, so that's going to be like it's discrete time intervals when these payments are going to happen. So at time t, we calculate the sum of the index values across all authors, right? And then for each author, we calculate their relative contribution to that overall index. So that's the share SIT. And then from the available pot of tokens for royalty payments, MT, we pay each author just the share that they have in that total pot at that moment. And then fifth, donations into the Open Science Fund could be spread out over time to reduce random fluctuations in royalty payments and token price, right? So this is something that you can do mechanically by just programming it. But I actually think that in order for something like that to work well, you probably need an active and smart governance of the fund. Okay, very simple example. We have at time t equals 1, we have a pot of 30 tokens, and we have 3 scientists that contributed. We calculated their contribution index. So for 1, it's 5, for 2, it's 3, and for 3, it's 8. So the overall contribution here is 16, and then we distribute according to the relative share that the authors have. So the yellow guy gets 9.3, the green guy gets 5.6, and the blue one gets 15. Okay. So now the big question, how do we measure the quantity and quality of contributions, XYT? So whatever we're going to do there, it's going to be an arbitrary choice with far-reaching implications. So this is why I think experimentation is needed. So one thing to do that would be, for example, by having several different algorithms that incentivize slightly different things, and assign these algorithms randomly to research objects that get published. And then you can basically, then you have like a clean experiment. You can actually compare how these algorithms, what type of dynamics they trigger. So things to consider for measuring contributions. First of all, the number of received citations. So this could be within the nodes ecosystem, but we could also look at databases such as OpenAlex, Google, Dimensions, whatever. Second, we could look at views, shares, and mentions that happen on the platform. Third, we need to consider the number of co-authors on a research object. And the royalties, they could either be shared equally or according to some sort of author-created cap table. And then finally, the received attestations of the research object. So this is where I think we can actually couple quantity and quality with each other. So we could have certain whitelisted attestations that reward best practices, such as data sharing or reproducible science, etc. And these attestations could have a multiplying effect. And it could be so extreme that you say, well, if you don't have certain attestations, then the multiplier is going to be 0 and you're not going to get anything, right? So there's a lot of room for experimentation here, obviously. So properties of this simple author royalty algorithm, I think advantages are, so one of the advantages is that the credits that the authors are building up, they're actually cumulative, which means that the earlier you join the system, the higher the rewards that you're going to get over time. Second, it also creates an incentive to basically publish all your work on notes. It can incentivize impact following best practice and can also incentivize scientific hygiene, such as reproducibility or replicability. And it allows rigorous and flexible experimentation with the incentives. And then finally, the strength of the incentives that the system creates would largely depend on the amount of received donations, right? So on the token price. So that at the same time is also a disadvantage. Okay. Other disadvantages, each method to quantify impact, XYT, is arbitrary and political. Views and citations can be manipulated and gamed. So this is a very, very common problem, even outside of DeSci, where, you know, if you would start doing like view and share counts and so on and so forth, it would be super easy to just build a bot and manipulate these numbers. We already have that in the current system where you have like citation cartels and that type of thing. So preventing, detecting, and sanctioning abuse of that type of thing would be costly. And then also the sponsors who would invest into the Open Science Fund, they wouldn't be able to choose what area or type of research they want to support. So we would need to develop this further to enable that. Okay, I'm going to stop it here and just open it up for discussion.
Yeah, if I could comment, Philipp, I'm a little bit familiar with this, of course, with the general idea, and I think a key piece are these attestations, right? And we've discussed different ways of doing that. So one thing that's occurred to me since we last spoke about it is, so if you look at how AI has made these developments in leaps and bounds, it works via essentially tournaments. Right, so they create a test. They say if you can accomplish a certain thing, like if you can identify dogs in a stack of images correctly, you know, we're going to measure how well you can do that, and so that's how we measure how successful different research projects have been. So maybe we should think about whether it's possible for the community to generate tests so that there are sort of tournaments going on. And your performance in these tournaments as a research group, so this wouldn't be at the level of a research paper. I think we'd have to think about research groups that are pursuing a particular research agenda, and they could compete in these tournaments, which might be things like proving that I can solve a certain problem. It could be making a prediction about something, and then we see what happens, right, and who was correct. And so that would be a measurable way of seeing how well you succeed. And one advantage is that you wouldn't have to a priori be committed to a methodology, right? And this is exactly what happened in AI, that you have different people using different approaches. How do we do image recognition? And we found over time that certain methodologies were more successful than others because they just did better on these tests, right? So this is not I would say, an alternative to what we're talking about here. This is one way we could think about attestations, that they're not always sort of people volunteering to do some work,
Right.
but instead somebody creates a tournament and then we see how well you did, right? And you can opt into the tournament as a research group.
That's interesting.
Yeah, super interesting. Actually, something that like Renan, you were talking a little bit last time was about this retroactive. So maybe I don't know if you're making a similar connection of like, all right, we've actually determined what's important. Now, how do you backwards fund people who have successfully worked? Do you have any thoughts there? If not, no worries.
I like that idea, but I don't have any other additional thoughts. But I like the connection for sure.
Yeah, I think
Fair.
there's an advantage with tournaments, because tournaments we have pretty good mechanism designed to rank things, and with tournaments we can also elicit reciprocity as eligibility criteria, right? So these are pretty interesting things. That means if you enter the tournament, you're just like if you want to publish a paper in a computer science conference, you have to peer review 3 other papers, right? So you have this built-in capacity to elicit reciprocity, right? But it comes with all of the issues we know around these computer science conferences, right? Reviewer rings, issues around bias and these types of things, right? That would affect the system as well. But it's in general, tournaments allow for the establishment of reciprocity mechanisms, right? Costly entry systems.
I mean, I think you'd want to have objectively measurable criteria, right? And I'm thinking, even if let's say ultimately we have the humanities in here as well, right? And somebody's writing an English paper or something. Ultimately, if you're learning something from what people do, that should translate into some kind of skill to understand something better, to do something. So if the tournament is about predicting what an individual will do in an experiment in a certain setting, and you're saying, well, the work I do in the humanities helps us understand humans better and their behavior, right? Then even that could be potentially objectively measured. And it could be, I don't know, political scientists, psychologists, and English people from English competing. So that because everything else that we're discussing sort of tends to be sensitive to what discipline we're in, right? And sort of what matters in that discipline. And I think it would be good to have a solution that gets away from that.
Yeah.
Be someone's incentive to participate in the tournament.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
What would be someone's incentive to be a participant in the tournament? Is there some of the token behind the tournament to win, or is it just like bragging rights?
Well, that's what I would think, that there's a disbursement based on the results. And I mean, that's in practice what has happened in AI, right? I mean, the people who did well got a whole bunch of resources thrown at them afterwards when it showed that their methodology can do things. Or it could be valuable in the same way that attestations have value in the system, that Philipp has introduced. I mean, he's only introduced a sort of a slice, right, of the whole thing, but
tiny
but they're pretty important.
And another thing I'm wondering is to which extent, so like here we're spending quite a bit of time thinking about how we measure each individual scientist's contributions, right? It would seem to me that a given group of scientists, they'd just be, they could negotiate, they have thick communication channels, right? I think it's really important to know that me and my co-authors, we chat on Telegram, like we are closely together. We can coordinate within our group to determine, maybe it's like we want travel grant for my PhD student, like, okay, you can take the tokens, right? So like there's this thing, because we have thick communication channels and these scientific groups work in teams, that there's an argument to be made that it is completely at their discretion to figure out their distributional mode, right? And the only thing we should do is actually distribute on the research object itself, right, on the contribution. And then it should be up to them to have full discretionary distributional rights over it, right? And I think that and that relaxes a lot of the difficulties we have around tracking contributions, because you could have a math proof and just delete a number or a symbol and it makes it work, right? But like if you want to track that, you have one character change, right? A one character change. And so like it's very hard to like assign like objective value on this, like similar to GitHub. Like we still haven't figured out how to say whether a commit on GitHub is actually more valuable than another commit on GitHub, because deletion, just like addition, is very difficult to say what is a valuable commit. And like there's companies out there that do complex machine learning algorithms just to try and pierce that problem, and it's essentially more or less intractable right now, right? So like this idea of like having a group of scientists and being able to come up with a fixed distributional scheme that follows an algorithm based on, even if we had the most fine-grained CRDT control over every changes, every edit, every single contribution of everyone, we would still not be able to accurately predict, right, what is a valuable contribution, what is not, right? So it's a very tough problem. But because we have thick communication channels, we can also bypass it completely and say, well, the pot is distributed at the team level, and then the team decides what it wants to do with it, right? So that would be one comment. And the other thing, I guess, like, which is really the crux of the question, is like the arbitrariness behind it is a problem, right? Like the idea, oh, this research object deserves 1,000 token, but this one only 1, right? Like who makes up the rules, right? Like, and how do you end up with a system that converges, right, at the limits? Because I think that's the goal. The goal is that an open science fund to work at the limit should converge into producing better science in a provable way, right? That's a really, really hard and ambitious goal, I think, to achieve. But I think it's very, very essential for the underlying narrative that would power that, right? So like figuring that out is a really tricky question. Like, how do we establish? How do we say, well, open code, right? Open code is worth, it's a 2x multiplier. What if the code of that paper is essentially a Python script that says x equal 2 + 2?
Yes, exactly.
Does that open code attestation, is that really worth like a 2x multiplier?
Yeah,
probably not, right? Like think about like this issue of like the
This
moment
is
you have
where objective
incentive.
measures don't work as well as social measures.
Yeah,
But Jahar, I know
that's one of the crux of the problem. Is like, okay, so now we come up, let's say we have a set of attestation, we come up with like multiplier effects. Well, what's going to happen? The natural tendency of that system is, again, based on that comment on the board, which is once you have a measure, it ceases to become a good measure, right? And I think this gets expressed really, really strongly in the presence of very powerful economic incentives, where it just goes bananas, right? So like we have to be very mindful about that. And that's why I've been, I think, like trying to make sense of social reality in a way that accommodates for plurality of perspectives and converges towards something like, a kernel of truth, because the mechanism design is clever. I think that's really the goal here. And it's non-trivial to realize that. Because we cannot just come up with like how Research Hub did it at the start. They had like an upvote is 1 research coin. This behavior is 10 research coin. That behavior is 500 research coin, I think, right?
Yeah.
I think that type of like top-down system is always going to lead to like these problems down the road, right? And the question is there a class of mechanism that allows us to make truth an effort, right? Like elicit honest and effortful feedback in a way that maximally minimizes the role of biases, right? And that's why I'm really interested in community nodes, right? And I think other types of classes of mechanisms around that.
Yeah. We can jump into that in a second, but Shahar, you'd been unmuted for a while. Did you have something to say there?
Yeah, regarding like these sort of measures and tournaments and stuff like that. So I used to work in DAOstack, also Ronen, and I shared one of the posts we wrote together. It's on a mechanism of we called it common good, which is basically some format of a retroactive funding. And yeah, we always came back to this place that even if it's a tournament, there's like first place, second place, like at the end someone needs to decide, like the judge, like even if it's like we make it as objective as possible, there's still some subjectiveness to the whole thing, you know, induced by who is the judge, who is going to decide, who is first, who is second, etc. And you know, in general, we want to enable like not necessarily a tournament like scenarios, right? Like in DeSci, right? We want to enable collaboration and diversity of opinions, and you know, we want people to elicit, you know, truthful information, like even if, you know, even if it's stupid, right? It can help in the scientific discourse, right? So like for example, I don't know if anyone of you know polymath. Are you aware of this sort of a project? It's like polymath. It's some sort of a community of mathematicians who, you know, just decide on a problem, and then, you know, like collectively try to solve it together, and they have like their own sort of cultural you know, things, behaviors that they want to promote, which is like, you know, there's no stupid thing, right? You shouldn't, if you see like how to solve the problem, don't do it, you know, just share your ideas like straight away, raw, and like there's a lot of interesting things over there. But yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say that, yeah, this challenge is very is very like context dependent, like on the community and the social structure, and like I think it's impossible to find like this, you know, like a collective solution for all evaluation of contributions done.
Yeah, fair.
Very, very quickly, because I have a direct response to that. Like, agree with you so much, and especially the null results are important results, negative results are important results. But like, that's why I think it's really important when we're designing these incentive structures that we're not trying to find the answer. Yes, all this stuff is complex. I'm land on the fence. It's not very difficult to do any of this shit. We just need to do it and sit down and think about it. But we need to design the context and that infrastructure that enables other people to build what they want for their own community, so that they can enable themselves to do their own thing. And then you'll end up with a bunch of competing different theories and put into practice. And just like Kristen, you were talking about with LLMs, the better method for incentivization, the better method for metrics will win out in the end. And there will probably be dozens of very good ones that persist for hundreds of years, a forest of knowledge, etc. And one thing I'm concerned about, Philip, with your piece, with the way that this token is presented right now, I do not for the life of me see why. I love everything after the token, but I don't see why we don't just take that math and apply it to US dollars. Let's ask CZI or some funder for some dollars, and then apply your metrics and just distribute those dollars. Why do we need a token for what you're describing? And I don't know if we have time to answer that, but that's
I tried to get into that. So I think the token would generate additional value in terms of information, status, and I also think that it solves the peer review problem, which we didn't get into here, because like honestly, I do not think that that publishers would actually ever pay referees. But by having a system of tokens where basically what you give to the system is what you get back, that solves the problem.
Yeah, quick pause. So we do want to jump on to what Chris is saying. Unless, Chris, you want to potentially spend more time in a future seminar, you can let me know that, and then that determines if I say, Levy, can you put that in the in the Figma, or if Levy can talk. Chris,
I would like
so
Levy to say his piece. I'm curious.
Okay.
Levy has great intuitions on mechanism design.
Yeah.
So regarding the token, like one of the issues that you might come up with when you're trying to reward for different like number of co-authors and so on and so forth is the massive difference between fields. You know, some fields of mathematics are going to have, you know, like you could be a genius and have like 50 citations, you know, and you could, you know, and you can just be like some co-author on some like massive paper that has 100,000 citations, but it has like 200 authors or whatever. And so like there's a major problem of granularity with only using a single token. And so there is, and I've seen this in a lot of other places, this idea, but basically it might be worth exploring having community specific tokens or field specific tokens, and then having an underlying token that is backed like by a basket of goods, basket of goods style by all of these other community field tokens, basically. And so that what that basically enables you to do is basically, first of all, now these communities have much more control over what is rewarded and how it's rewarded. It's not going to be perfect, but because it's so much more granular, people have much more voice and much more choice over what's going on. And it also separates the value production. And this is a bit unfortunate, but like it does, it's unfortunate and unfortunate, but it also separates the value production and creation that comes from all of these different communities, right? So the reality is that some scientific fields are going to just produce more in terms, in not the best measure, but more in terms of dollar value than others. Like, you know, it's like, that's not the best measure necessarily. And that's why we have tokens, because now we create our own measures. But that it does basically allow communities to more directly capture the value that they actually create. And so that's kind of like, of course, I have a ton to say about everything that's been said, but we're running out of time, and I want to end. But like that was like the main point I wanted to make, which is that it like a community oriented approach might fix some of the problems that only having one particular token for everything would create.
Mm.
So, Lovey, what if instead of a community-oriented approach is an infrastructure-oriented approach? This is exactly what I was describing, and I love it. Like if DeSci Labs builds a token that's an underlying layer, essentially an L1 or an L2, maybe an L0, and has a token to transact on that is measured by both the basket of any community coin that's built on top of it and underlying resources that are necessary for scientific endeavors, compute, data storage, that sort of thing. We can build a very stable infrastructure on which people can experiment. Very similar to what Ethereum did, but hopefully nothing like Ethereum.
I mean, I think that makes sense. I mean, yeah, of course, I mean, I was only focusing purely on like the kind of community to just take looking at the one token versus many tokens aspect. But yeah, I mean, the reality is like this, all of these tokens aren't going to exist in a vacuum, right? They're all going to be interrelated with the platforms that we're using, with the apps that we're using, and so on. So there's like infrastructure is in my mind at least like inextricably interwoven with the rest of the economy, basically.
It's a dynamic system like you're describing, and it's dynamic in more ways as well, because I think like society values one field of science more at one period of time than at another period. Sometimes we value medicine very much, sometimes we value space discovery, sometimes at math, etc. So like it allows for that value to take place within the system with that underlying infrastructure, and then a bunch of community tokens that hop in and out of existence, and some persist and some don't. I very much like what you're saying. Let's build it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also I wanted to piggyback on that for a second, but I forgot what I was going to say, so never mind.
Yeah, no. So I mean, in general, I think like giving maximum freedom for communities to determine their fate is very important. There's no one size fits all solution. That I also definitely agree. I do basket of goods and these types of methods. Yes, they do in principle make sense. They do add a lot of complexity, but yes, it's a way to address that. I guess I think it's important to like have like a couple of Occam's razor here, right? Like, so the first Occam's razor is like, can this be done with a PayPal integration, right? This is the first one, right? If it can be done with a PayPal integration, do it with a PayPal integration. The second Occam's razor, I think, is okay, if you cannot do it with Occam's razor, like if you cannot, can it be done with Amex points that are not liquid and cannot be traded out of the system? Like imagine like a peer review reciprocity token, has no value, cannot be transferred outside the platform, is completely locked in, but like it's there, right? And it's doing its role. Like the question is, as soon as you introduce like the possibility to have like a liquidity pool that allows to transfer something into value, well, what do you break down the line, right? So like, I think these are like really two like good like, and I think there's probably a lot more Occam's razors that we need to come up with, by the way. I think there's a lot more that like checks, like sanity checks on any of these system designs that we need to come up with.
That's a really good point, especially regarding the non-transferability. Because like, I mean, what does transferability do in economics, right? It basically it allows you to transfer utility, right? That's like kind of what currencies do, and that's what they create. And so it's an absolutely like base level question that needs to be asked first, which is like, what if this currency is non-transferable, kind of like related to an SBT or soulbound token, right? What, and you could also have more than, you can have a mix, right? That you can have like both and so on. But like, yeah, like rigorously questioning the foundations of tokens is absolutely essential, because too often the solution here is just, let's just make a token and that'll solve everything. And but you have to jump off, I see.
Yeah, I gotta go.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyone can jump off, but if people are happy to continue having discussion, I'll still be here. And Shahar, you were saying something.
But
I was wondering,
guys, I want to continue these conversations. Are we going to do the next seminar on the same thing?
The next seminar is Ronan, actually. So that'll be slightly different, but the seminar after that was going to be more something that was led by Research Hub potentially, but it's also not fully booked, so it's potentially just open. Which means we could have more here.
Continue conversations about incentive design. I think now is a very good time to accelerate these conversations and not have weeks in between. Maybe have 2 discussions a week, particularly on this, so we can develop something rapidly.
Yeah. Why don't you and I touch base about that? And also we have a place I can drop the Discord in the follow-up email, and we can have asynchronous conversations there, if that sounds good.
Yeah, I wanted to suggest like I wanted to suggest maybe that like lately I was in contact with like also Ronen, like with a concept called like a grassroots democracy, which is some framework which has been developed by Professor Udi Shapiro, and I think like it would be very interesting just to bring him in and listen to what he has to say. He has this notion of grassroots cryptocurrencies, which sounds like, they kind of satisfy, like they tick all the boxes in some way. Maybe it could be interesting to bring him for a seminar or something like that.
Yeah, connect. I will. Are you on did you get the email from me?
I'll connect.
No,
I'll connect you guys. Yeah, we can do it on the Discord. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. And let's definitely chat about that, because that sounds like a lot of what we were talking about right here.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting, like for everyone to hear about the concept, because anyway, thank you.
Yeah,
and,
awesome.
Sorry for
thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. This was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really great.
Sweet. Bye.
Bye.